They say the woods are quiet because they're peaceful, but the forest I found, it was quiet like a held breath, like something was waiting. I didn't go looking for trouble. I just needed to get away. A month ago, my life unraveled like a loose thread I kept pulling without realizing the sweater was falling apart. First, my long-term relationship ended, suddenly, and with the kind of silence that feels louder than any shouting match. Then my freelance photography gigs dried up. One client ghosted me mid-project. Another forgot to pay. It wasn't just work or heartbreak. It was this constant hum in my head that I couldn't shut off. I was tired of city noise, notifications, people asking me if I was okay when I clearly wasn't. So I did what I always do when life feels too heavy. I ran for the woods. I've spent years hiking alone, capturing foggy sunrises and twisted branches for my blog. Nature has always been my reset button. But this time, I didn't want just another state park or crowded trail. I wanted isolation. That's how I found Whispering Pines, a campsite that wasn't on Google Maps but showed up in a buried thread on an old nature photography forum. The post had no pictures, just a few sentences. Quietest place I've ever stayed. No service. No tourists. Just you and the trees. Look for the old logging road, past mile marker 77, on Highway 12. It's still there barely. Most people would have scrolled past it. It didn't even sound inviting. But there was something about the way it was written, like a secret whispered, just for me. So I packed my gear. DSLR, tripod, backup batteries, extra memory cards. A week's worth of food, my camping stove, survival knife, and a journal, because part of me hoped this would be the trip where I'd finally figure things out. Get unstuck. The drive up was beautiful at first. Golden leaves swirling across winding roads, mist hovering low in the valleys. But the deeper I went, the narrower the roads became. Paved roads turned to cracked asphalt. Cracked asphalt turned to gravel. Then gravel faded into dirt, and I found myself bouncing along a path that looked more like a forgotten trail than a road. My GPS glitched out 15 minutes after I turned past mile marker 77. It froze, then blanked completely. No signal, no bars, just a dead screen and the sound of crunching leaves under my tires. That should have been the first red flag. But I didn't turn back. Instead, I kept driving until I saw the rusted gate, half fallen and swallowed by moss. A handmade wooden sign hung from a nail, barely readable, Whispering Pines. I stepped out of my car, stretched, and took a deep breath. The silence hit me like a wall. No birdsong, no breeze, just the hum of my engine and the sound of my own breathing. I remember thinking, this is perfect. I didn't know yet that this place had rules. I didn't know what I'd find in the trees, or would find me. All I knew in that moment was that I had finally arrived, and the forest had opened its arms. The road narrowed the deeper I drove. Trees pressed in on either side like old walls closing around me. Tall evergreens stretched high overhead, their tops swallowed by a thick gray fog that had rolled in some time after I lost cell service. Everything felt muted out here. The sky, the colors, even the air. It was like the forest didn't want to be noticed. I slowed my truck to a crawl. The gravel cracked beneath the tires, and I glanced at the GPS again. The screen was frozen, the blue route line flickering like it couldn't decide where I was. I tapped it. Nothing. No signal. I was officially off the map. Perfect. This was what I came for. Solitude. Silence. Time to be with my thoughts without the noise of the world pressing in. But still, something about the way the trees leaned over the road, like they were eavesdropping, made me roll up my window, just a bit. According to the printed directions I had in my glove box, just in case, I was only about a mile away from Whispering Pines. I passed an old wooden sign that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. It was barely readable under a layer of moss and scratches, but I could make out the words. Welcome to Whispering Pines State Campground. There were claw marks on the bottom edge. I told myself it was probably from a bear. Bears claw things all the time, right? The road curved into the trees and dipped downward. The fog thickened. Soon I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My headlights lit up long fingers of mist that curled and drifted across the ground. It was beautiful and eerie all at once, like I was driving straight into someone else's dream or nightmare. I passed a collapsed fence, then a half-buried picnic table, one leg sticking up like a broken limb. No one else was here. I hadn't seen another car for over an hour. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made my skin itch. I spotted it next, a clearing. The fog thinned just enough for me to see several wooden cabins, spaced in a half circle, with a dead fire pit in the center surrounded by rotting logs for benches. The buildings were old, but sturdy-looking. The grass was short. There were no broken windows, no graffiti. Strange. For an abandoned site, it looked maintained. I parked near the edge of the clearing and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and wet, like the forest breathed ice. The quiet was total. No birdsong, no insects, just my boots crunching over damp gravel. Then I saw it. Near the entrance of the campsite stood a board nailed to two wooden posts. A sheet of yellowed paper was pinned to it. The writing was in thick red ink, almost as if it had been painted with a finger. I walked closer, breath catching in my throat as I read. The 13 Rules of Whispering Pines. 1. Do not leave food scraps outside. 2. Do not whistle after dark. 3. Do not enter cabin 6. 4. Always leave a gift by the fire pit at midnight. 5. If you hear your name from the woods, do not answer. It went on. Each rule was stranger than the last. One of them simply read, 12. Do not speak to the man in the green coat. He is not real. I stared at that one longer than the others. It had to be a joke. A leftover prop from some urban legend junkie trying to spook visitors. But the way the ink had run slightly, the smudges like someone had touched it with trembling hands, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a warning. A breeze passed through the clearing, cold and sudden. The trees behind me creaked. I turned quickly, hard jumping. Nothing there. Just mist rolling through the trees. I shook it off. This is fine, I whispered, more to myself than anything. It's just the woods. I grabbed my bag from the truck and made my way toward the nearest cabin. I didn't know it yet, but this would be the last time I felt even a sliver of peace. The forest had already noticed me, and the rules weren't suggestions. They were survival. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching under my boots, and was met with a silence that felt too thick for daytime. Not even the rustle of leaves or birdsong. Just air, still and heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. Whispering Pines looked nothing like what I expected. The campground wasn't run down or overgrown. It was preserved. A row of small wooden cabins stood in a crescent around a central fire pit, their roofs clean, windows intact. A trail split off toward what looked like an old ranger station, and lanterns, actual glass lanterns, hung on hooks beside each cabin. They were unlit but spotless, polished like someone had cleaned them. I grabbed my camera from the passenger seat and slung my backpack over one shoulder. I planned to document everything for a blog post, maybe even a YouTube video, if the footage looked decent. Something felt off, sure, but it wasn't like I hadn't camped in weird places before. Then I saw the sign. It stood at the head of the gravel path like a warning you couldn't miss. A wide, cracked wooden board nailed to two thick posts, slightly tilted like the earth underneath it had shifted. Words were painted across it in large red brushstrokes, still bright against the pale wood. The title read, Rules of Whispering Pines. Follow them, or be forgotten. Beneath there were 13 numbered rules. I read them once. Then again. 1. Arrive before sunset. Leave before sunrise. 2. Always knock twice before entering a cabin, even if it's yours. 3. Do not whistle after dark. 4. Leave a gift by the fire pit at midnight. Every night. 5. Never answer if you hear your name whispered from the woods. 6. Do not speak to the lanterns when they flicker. 7. If you see someone standing by the well, do not approach. 8. Don't sleep in the same cabin 2 nights in a row. 9. Burn any photograph you find that isn't yours. 10. If you hear knocking at the window, do not look. 11. Leave the forest how you found it, or it will not let you leave. 12. If the rules change, follow the new ones. 13. Never, ever break Rule 13. There was no 13th rule written, just that line. It made the back of my neck tighten. I laughed, a short, nervous thing. Someone had clearly gone all out to scare visitors. Probably a prank or an art project. Maybe the people who posted about this place online had added to the legend over the years. I took out my phone to snap a picture of the sign, but the screen wouldn't turn on. It was dead, fully charged when I left the car, and now, nothing. Even the camera wouldn't power up. Weird. I glanced back toward my car, half thinking of turning around. The fog had started to roll in behind it, thick enough that the trail back out was already fading. I told myself I was just jumpy, tired from the long drive. People love to scare themselves with stories. That's all this was. Still, I pulled out my journal and copied the rules down by hand. As I scribbled the last one, I heard movement behind me. Not footsteps exactly, more like fabric brushing against bark. I turned quickly. Nothing. Then I saw him, standing at the edge of the trees, maybe 15 feet away. A tall man in a forest ranger's coat, the collar turned up. He had a wide-brimmed hat low over his face, but I could make out his eyes, dark and steady, watching me like I was a wild animal. I froze. He raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. "You're early," he said. His voice was low, calm, like he wasn't surprised to see me. I didn't move. Yeah. Thought it'd be better to set up while it was still light. He nodded once. Then his gaze drifted past me, to the sign. "You read them?" I nodded. "Yeah, the rules. Kinda creepy. Is this some kind of local legend?" He didn't smile. Just said, "They're not there to scare you. They're there to keep you alive." I waited for him to say more, maybe crack a smile, let me in on the joke. He didn't. He turned and began walking back into the forest. I almost called after him, but something about the way he moved, like he belonged to the woods, made my throat tighten. Before he disappeared between the trees, he called back to me, "Don't forget the gift." Then he was gone. I stood there for a long time, listening, hoping for birds, insects, wind, anything. But the forest stayed quiet, and I was completely alone. I always thought I'd be comfortable being alone in the woods. I've done solo hikes before, spent nights in national parks, slept under the stars with only the wind and bugs for company. But this felt different. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, I'd already unpacked my gear and set up my small dome tent near the old ranger cabin. I made a quick fire in the pit, cooked some canned soup, and took a few wide-angle shots of the forest as it darkened. The place had this strange, untouched beauty. Not peaceful. No, not quite. But still, something about it kept me curious. That curiosity started to shrink the moment night really fell. I sat on a log near the fire, looking over the photos on my camera. That's when I heard it. Just a faint snap of a twig, off in the dark beyond the tree line. Not unusual. Could have been a deer. Could have been a raccoon. But something about the way it didn't move after the snap chilled me. It was like whatever made the sound was waiting. I shook it off and reminded myself I was just being paranoid. First nights in unfamiliar places always mess with my head. That's what I told myself, anyway. The fire started to die down. I didn't feel like building it back up. I zipped myself into the tent, pulled the sleeping bag around me, and listened to the forest breathe. Silence. Not the usual kind. Not the soft hush of night animals and wind. This was a deep, heavy kind of silence, like the world was holding its breath. Then I remembered the rule. Do not leave food out overnight. I'd tossed the leftover soup can into a small bag, but hadn't hung it from the tree the way the sign suggested. I told myself it was fine. Bears weren't common in this part of Oregon. And besides, I'd be gone in 2 days. What harm could it do? At some point, I must have drifted off. I don't know how long I was asleep before I woke up. But some feeling, yanked me out of dream. I lay still, eyes wide open in the dark. My heart thudded against my ribs, loud enough to feel in my throat. Then I heard it. Not footsteps. Not quite. It was more like something brushing against the tent. A long, slow drag of something dry. Branches? Fingertips? I didn't move. The noise circled the tent once, then stopped. I waited, listened. Sweat trickled down my back, even though the air was cold. I slowly reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. Nothing. I unzipped the tent flap just an inch, enough to peek out. There were footprints. They weren't mine. Too big. Too deep. And they circled the tent exactly once, like someone had paced around it, and stopped just behind me. I swung the flashlight in that direction. Nothing. I stepped out, slowly. The night was thick with fog, and the beam from my light barely cut through it. I looked down at the footprints again. They were gone. Just gone. The dirt was smooth, untouched, like they'd never been there. I turned back to the tent. That's when I saw it. Pinned to the side of the tent with a rusty nail was a note, small, yellowed, written in red ink. One warning. My stomach dropped. The food bag was gone too. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat by the fire pit, feeding until the sun came up, flashlight in one hand, the note in the other. This wasn't just a spooky forest. This place knew when you broke the rules. And it didn't like it. I woke up cold. Not the usual crisp morning chill you expect when you camp in the woods. This was deeper, sharper. It clung to my skin, soaked into my bones. My sleeping bag had slipped halfway off during the night, and the fire I'd made had gone out hours ago. The light seeping through the cracked window of the old ranger cabin was gray and still, like the world was holding its breath. I sat up slowly, blinking the fog out of my head. My camera bag was right where I left it. So was my notebook. But something felt off. My boots were wet. I hadn't worn them since yesterday afternoon, and I knew I hadn't stepped outside during the night. But the soles were muddy, and faint pine needles clung to the sides. I frowned and stood up, wobbling slightly on stiff legs, and that's when I noticed it. The door was open. Only a crack, but enough to notice. I was sure, absolutely sure, I had locked it. The heavy wooden latch only worked from the inside, and I remembered hearing the clunk before I went to bed. I had even double-checked it. So how the hell was it open? I pushed the door wide and stepped outside. The morning fog was still hanging between the trees, like cobwebs in the air. Everything was damp and silent. No birds, no wind, no rustling leaves. And right there, in the soft dirt just a few feet from the porch, were the footprints. Not mine. They were longer, deeper, and bare. No shoes. Just long, pale impressions like someone, or something, had walked up to my door in the middle of the night, stood there for a while, and then turned back into the forest. I crouched down, my heart thudding in my ears. The tracks were fresh. You could still see the edges of the toes, the delicate lines of skin texture pressed into the mud. No animal did this, and I sure as hell didn't walk out here barefoot. There was something else, too. Right in the center of the top step, between my boots, was a small object. At first I thought it was a pine cone, but when I picked it up, my fingers recoiled. It was a skull, a tiny one, maybe a bird, or something even smaller. Clean, bleached white, and clutched in its hollow eye socket was a scrap of faded paper, curled from the damp. I unfolded it with trembling hands. For words, written in red ink. One warning, no more. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat on the step, staring at that note. My throat was dry. My heart pounded like it was trying to escape. I hadn't taken the rules seriously. Not really. I thought they were creepy campfire nonsense. But now, something had walked up to my door, left me a message, and disappeared into the trees without a sound. I looked back at the rule board, still nailed to the signpost a few yards away. The ink looked even darker than I remembered. I reread Rule 4. Do not leave food scraps outside. The forest remembers. Last night, I had tossed a few apple cores out behind the cabin. Too tired to care. Too distracted to think. And now the forest had answered. I stayed close to the fire the rest of the day. I didn't wander off. I didn't take photos. I didn't even eat much. I just sat there, feeling the weight of the woods pressing in. When night came again, I left a gift at the fire pit. A photograph. One I had taken on my first morning here. Back when I still thought this place was beautiful. I folded it neatly, placed it by the ashes, and whispered, "I'm sorry." The trees creaked softly in the dark. And somewhere, not far from the edge of the clearing, I heard footsteps retreating into the leaves. The sun had barely set when I ventured deeper into the woods, my camera slung over my shoulder like a lifeline. I've been walking for hours, just me and the rustling leaves, trying to capture the eerie beauty of the place. It was strange. This forest felt too quiet. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. I had heard the rumors. Whispering Pines was no stranger to strange disappearances. But as I stood there, facing the overgrown trail that led further into the heart of the campgrounds, I didn't know what to believe. The place had an unsettling stillness about it, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I tried to shake off the tension building in my chest, telling myself it was just my nerves from the drive. Still, a part of me couldn't help but feel watched. I kept telling myself it was just the trees, the wind, the natural paranoia that comes with being alone in a place like this. But the unease clung to me, like the wet moss growing on the trunks of the trees. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon something that would make me question my rational mind. The forest seemed to open up in front of me, revealing a small clearing. The ground was dotted with old, faded tints, their fabric torn by years of neglect. But what stood out the most were the stone circles scattered around the area. Fire pits. Some looked used recently. Others were just remnants of old ash. It wasn't until I noticed the small, tattered cloth tied to a nearby tree that I realized something was off. At first, I thought it was just a forgotten piece of trash, but as I stepped closer, I saw the details. The cloth was no ordinary piece of fabric. It was stained, dark, reddish stains. Not the kind that came from rusted metal, but something more organic. I felt a shiver race down my spine as I traced my fingers over it. The thread was coarse, nearly like rope. I lifted it from the tree, holding it carefully in my hands, as if I feared whatever it was attached to might lash out at me. That's when I saw it. A pile of objects, arranged neatly in a strange circle just beyond the tree. Small trinkets, a cracked watch, a few coins, a child's toy, a wooden horse that looked like it had been chewed by something. And in the middle of it all, what looked like bones. Tiny, animal bones, arranged in a way that almost seemed deliberate. A chill crept over me. I had seen enough horror documentaries to recognize a sacrifice when I saw one. And while I tried to convince myself that it was just some sick joke, some prank played by other campers, the unease in my gut told me it wasn't. Not here, not in a place like this. I turned, my breath hitching, eyes scanning the trees, but all I saw was the darkening woods. I'd gone too far now, past the point of no return. The rules were all I had to cling to, and I had already broken one without realizing it. The little offering by the fire pit at midnight. My mind raced. Had I made a mistake? Was this a warning? The shadows seemed to deepen, and I took a step back, the hairs on my neck prickling with every noise, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. I was about to leave, about to turn around, when I heard something that froze me in place. A soft, distant whisper. Not a voice. More like a low murmur, something carried on the wind. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the kind of thing you hear when you're alone too long. But then, it happened again, and this time I was sure. It was calling my name. Taylor. I spun around, heart racing in my chest, but there was nothing. The woods were silent, eerily still, as if mocking me for my fear. I moved quickly, clutching my camera to my chest, trying to swallow down the rising panic. The whispering continued, faint but clear, as though it were coming from all around me. I stumbled back toward the campsite, praying I could make it to the safety of my cabin before whatever was out here made its presence known. I didn't realize until I was halfway back that I hadn't done it. I hadn't left anything behind. The fire pit had been empty. I hadn't offered my trinket, my gift, as the rules demanded. My pulse quickened as I thought about the pile of bones, the cloth, the twisted little trinkets, each one a reminder of someone who had been here before me, someone who had made an offering. Had they made the same mistake? I couldn't help but feel the weight of their eyes, staring from the shadows, watching me, waiting for me to follow their example. I reached the cabin and slammed the door behind me, locking it tight. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to calm myself, but it was no use. I knew that whatever force was out there, whatever twisted thing lingered in the woods, wasn't going to let me go without consequence. And I had just made my first offering. I woke to the kind of silence that wraps itself around your mind like a heavy, damp blanket, the sort of silence that presses down on you, making every breath feel like an intrusion. At first, I thought it was just the usual stillness of the woods, how the night always settles in like that, holding its breath before the new day arrives. But something felt off. The usual forest sounds weren't there. No rustling of leaves, no soft hoots of owls, no wind brushing through branches. Just nothing. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just the isolation. But as I lay there, in the cramped cabin, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The silence was too thick, too heavy. And then it came. A whisper. It was faint at first, barely a breath. My name. Taylor. I sat up straight, eyes snapping open, heart racing. My breath was shallow, uneven. It sounded like someone was standing just outside the cabin, their lips brushing against the wood. But no one was there. The door was still bolted, the windows shut tight. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe just my imagination, still rattled from everything that had happened so far. I pulled the covers up over my shoulders, trying to force myself back to sleep, but the whispering kept coming, louder now, more insistent. Taylor. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was a sound, a voice, no, a presence, reaching into the room, trying to draw me out. I could hear the trees creaking in the distance, their branches groaning like old men in pain. But the whisper, no, the voice, it didn't stop. Taylor, come outside. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, like something was pressing against me. And I swear, I heard it again, but this time, it wasn't just the voice. It was something else, something wrong. A shift in the air, a pressure, like the trees were leaning in closer. Slowly, I stood up. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, and I flinched at the sound. I grabbed the lantern on the table, its light flickering weakly, as if reluctant to guide me. I made my way to the door, moving like a shadow in the dim light, knowing the whole time I shouldn't be doing this, that I should stay inside and wait for the morning. But I couldn't help it. I had to see. The door opened with a groan, the cold air rushing in like a slap to my face. I stepped outside, the forest stretching out before me in that same oppressive silence. The trees were darker now, looming over me like giants. The fog was thicker, swirling around my feet, hiding the ground beneath. I tried to steady my breath, but it was hard. My heart pounded against my ribcage, each beat like a hammer. And that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow moving between the trees. But then it took form, a shape emerging from the fog. A figure, tall and thin, standing just beyond the edge of the clearing. I couldn't see its face, but the way it moved, it wasn't natural. The figure shifted, slid between the trees, as though it wasn't walking, but gliding. No, more like floating. I froze. My body went rigid, as if my legs refused to move. But I couldn't look away. Something pulled me toward it, against every instinct that screamed at me to turn around and run. The air felt thick around me, each breath feeling like I was inhaling something heavier than oxygen. It came closer, and that's when I noticed the trees behind it. The branches were moving. They weren't just swaying in the wind. They were twisting, shifting, reaching, almost as if the trees themselves were a part of the thing, like it was made of the forest, a part of it, and the forest was a part of it. I barely heard the soft whisper of my name again. This time, it was more urgent. Taylor, you have to come. It's waiting. The figure stepped closer to me, and that's when I finally understood. What I was looking at wasn't human. The shape was wrong. Its limbs stretched too long, too thin, the edges of its body fading into the dark fog, like it was somehow a part of the forest itself. And then it happened. A sound, no, a screech, ripped through the silence. The trees around me shook, the branches creaking under the weight of something massive. My head snapped up, and there, in the canopy above me, I saw it. A face. Not a human face. Not even an animal's face. It was wrong. Its features contorted, a blur of teeth and eyes, the skin stretched thin, pale, and cracked. Its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, as if it was trying to devour the entire world. I couldn't breathe. The air felt like it was crushing me. My heart raced. My thoughts scrambled. The thing in the trees, it was waiting. It was waiting for me to do something, to make a choice. But what? What could I do? The figure took one more step forward, and the world around me shifted. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches now grasping at me, reaching, grabbing, pulling. I heard my name again, but this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a demand, a voice full of hunger, full of need. And in that moment, I knew something worse than fear. I wasn't supposed to be here. The forest felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating in its silence. I'd wandered for hours, the fog thickening with every step, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn somewhere. My feet knew the path before my mind did, straight to the ranger station. It was hidden behind a veil of trees, tucked away as if trying to remain forgotten. I stood at the entrance for a long moment, staring at the weathered door. It looked ancient, the wood dark and splintered. I almost turned away, but something inside urged me to push forward. Was it curiosity or something deeper? Something that had already claimed me, whether I knew it or not. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The air inside was stale, like old paper and dust, and the floorboards groaned beneath my feet. The dim light coming through the grimy windows did little to reveal the room's contents. shelves lined with cracked jars, empty boxes, and piles of old equipment. But in the far corner, there was something that caught my attention. A desk, covered in papers, a map spread out over the top. My heart skipped a beat as I walked toward it. I couldn't explain why I reached for the journal. It wasn't like I was looking for answers anymore. I had already found too many of those. But this was different. This journal felt heavy in my hands, like it carried the weight of years, of lives, of promises broken. The pages inside were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting uneven and scrawled with desperation. At first, it made no sense. I could barely make out the words, but I caught enough to understand the gravity. I am the caretaker, one page read. It is my duty to keep them satisfied, to guide them to the forest, and ensure they don't leave. The ink was smeared in places, as if the writer had been shaking with fear, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't just a job, it was a binding. I flipped through more pages, each one darker than the last. The entries grew more frantic, detailing how each camper, each lost soul, was chosen by the forest. There were dates, names of people who had vanished, and a pattern, always the same, always following the rules. I paused at a passage near the back, one that was almost torn in half. It described a ritual, a twisted exchange. The forest does not allow its guardians to leave. It consumes them, devours their will until they become the caretaker. I shivered, the realization sinking in. Romerio. I hadn't understood before, but now it clicked. Romerio wasn't just a man. He was something else entirely. Something bound to the forest, tied to it by the same rules he forced on others. The idea that he was the caretaker of this twisted place, no, the prison, the offering, was almost too much to grasp. He wasn't the only one. No one ever truly left. I heard a rustling sound behind me and spun around. My pulse shot through my chest. Romerio stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his presence heavy, as though the very air around him had thickened. "I see you found my little secret," he said, his voice eerily calm. I couldn't bring myself to speak. The journal trembled in my hands, and I felt my throat constrict. There was no denying it now. I knew what had happened to all the others. The campers, the hikers, the missing people who were never found. They were part of this, just like I was starting to be. "You think I chose this?" Romerio's words seemed to echo in the silent room. "You think I wanted this life?" He stepped forward, each movement slow and deliberate. "This forest, it has its own rules. It chooses. It controls." I backed away from him, but the journal remained in my hands, as if the words had already written me into its narrative. "What happens to them?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse. "They are the forest guests, just like you are," he replied, a strange, sad smile tugging at his lips. "Once they break the rules, once they become part of the cycle, they stay, in one form or another. This place doesn't forget. It never forgets." I shuddered, my thoughts racing. The truth was becoming clear, and with it came a crushing weight. I was next. This wasn't just a place I had stumbled upon. It had chosen me. I was already too deep to turn back. Romerio's eyes locked onto mine. "The forest is hungry," he whispered, almost as if to himself, "and it always needs someone to feed it." A chill ran through me. The rules, the gifts, the whispers. They weren't just random rituals. They were offerings, meant to keep the forest appeased, to feed whatever malevolent force lay beneath its roots. And now I was part of it. I could feel it, crawling through my veins, taking hold of me. I didn't think it would come to this," I muttered, almost in disbelief. "You didn't think, Taylor," Romerio said softly. "None of us do. We think we're in control. But in the end, the forest decides. The forest always decides." I wanted to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The fog outside felt thicker now, almost alive. The trees were closing in. The whispers were growing louder. I could hear my name again, carried on the wind, taunting me, beckoning me to step deeper into the forest's grasp. "I'm not leaving," Romerio said, as though reading my thoughts. "Not anymore. And neither are you." I looked down at the journal, its pages now seeming to stare back at me, as though waiting for me to write my own entry. "Come," Romerio said. "It's time for you to understand." I took one last glance at the journal, my fingers brushing the ink that had already begun to fade, as though the forest was erasing the past. The caretaker role was never a choice. It was inevitable. I stood frozen in place. Something dark was waiting for me out there, something that wasn't going to let me go. And for the first time, I realized it was too late to run. I don't know what I expected when I stumbled upon Romario's old ranger cabin, but I sure as hell didn't expect it to look so ordinary. It sat hidden behind a thicket of gnarled trees, so tightly wrapped in vines and moss that you might miss it if you weren't looking for it. The cabin was small, built from weathered wood that creaked like it had a life of its own. A thin trail of smoke rose lazily from a chimney, though there was no sign of Romario. I was already unsettled, my nerves fraying at the edges from everything that had happened over the past few days. But curiosity clawed at me, sharper than any fear. I needed answers, needed to know what kind of nightmare I'd walked into. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The inside was just as simple, if not more so, than the outside. A small cot tucked against one wall, an old wooden desk, shelves cluttered with books and maps. But something about it felt off. It wasn't abandoned, not by a long shot. The air was thick, almost stifling with a strange energy. The room smelled faintly of old paper, mildew, and something metallic. My eyes fell on a leather-bound journal sitting on the desk. It was open, as if waiting for someone to read it. I walked over, my boots scraping across the wooden floor. The pages were yellowed, frayed at the edges, and written in a hurried scrawl. My hand hovered over the pages for a moment before I gave in and flipped it open. The first entry was dated a few months ago, just before I arrived. It was Romario's handwriting, but there was something desperate about it. I've begun marking the newcomers. The rules must be enforced. If they don't follow, the forest takes them. I must keep it balanced. They're going to start asking questions. I can't afford that. My stomach twisted. I read on, barely able to keep my hands steady as I turned the pages. The entries were scattered, written over months, maybe even years. Romario's tone shifted from frustrated to cold, then to resigned. There were mentions of campers, strangers, who had come through, stayed for a night or two, and disappeared. Some left-behind items, photos. Most just vanished without a trace. Romario had kept track of them all, like pieces in a twisted game he was trapped in. One entry caught my eye. It was more recent, written just before my arrival. Taylor Reed has arrived. They are like the others. They will break the rules, and the forest will call them. But I must make them stay. They will understand, in time. We all must. I slammed the journal shut, my breath coming faster. He knew I was here, knew everything. And worse, he had planned this. All of it. I backed away from the desk, my mind racing. Was I just another pawn in Romario's sick little ritual? Was I meant to be his replacement, his successor? A cold chill ran down my spine, and for a moment I thought I heard something. A whisper. No, not a whisper, voices. But they weren't mine. They didn't belong to anyone I recognized. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The cabin's walls seemed to close in on me, the air growing thicker, harder to breathe. The voices echoed through the room, soft at first, like a murmur you could almost ignore. But then they grew louder, clearer. I could hear the desperation in them. Help me. Please don't leave me here. It's too late. They're coming. The rules are everything. I froze, my legs threatening to give way beneath me. The voices were all around me, coming from the walls, the floorboards, even the ceiling. I could hear the sound of people trapped inside them, pleading, begging, and crying out for something. Anything that could save them. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the cot and crashing to the floor. The journal lay next to me, open to the last entry. They're the lost ones. All who break the rules, they become part of it. The forest keeps them. They never leave. Not really. The words blurred in front of my eyes. I could feel something dark and heavy pressing against my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. The voices grew louder, more frantic. They were all around me now, a cacophony of desperate pleas, pleading for me to do something, anything to get them out. I forced myself to my feet, my hands shaking. The walls felt like they were closing in. I had to get out of there. I had to leave. But as I turned toward the door, a voice, clearer than the rest, spoke to me directly. It wasn't a whisper. It was a scream. You can't leave. Not now. You broke the rules. You're already one of us. I froze, my blood running cold. I couldn't tell if the voice was from the forest outside, or if it had come from inside my own head. It felt like the very air around me was alive, twisting, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. I ran. There was no other choice. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if I was still in control of my own body. All I knew was that the forest wasn't going to let me go. Not without its price. And I was already paying it. I stood there, staring at the board with the rules etched into it, my fingers trembling. It felt as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. I wasn't sure what had changed, but I could feel it deep inside me. The growing dread, the whispers that had never fully left me. The fear had become a part of me now, like an old friend, always there, always watching. But this felt different. Something about that board, those rules, made me feel as if I was staring into the heart of a living thing. Something ancient, something powerful. The last rule had been burned into my mind ever since I first laid eyes on it. Break the rules, and you will become the forest's. It sounded like a cryptic warning, a riddle meant to scare off anyone who dared venture here. But now, standing in front of it, the words seemed to pulse with life, as if they were alive, waiting for me to test them. I should have left when I had the chance. The whispers, the strange noises, the unsettling sense that I wasn't alone. I should have listened to my gut. But no, I had stayed. I had ignored all the warnings, and now here I was, caught in this twisted game. A game where the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. I took a step closer to the board. The air around me felt heavier now, thick with the scent of pine and something other. I couldn't place it. Damp earth mixed with something sharp, metallic like blood. It made my stomach churn, but I didn't look away from the board. The rules, all of them, felt like chains. I had already broken so many of them, innocently at first, leaving food scraps out overnight, whistling after dark. But those were small things, weren't they? The rules felt like suggestions more than anything else. I was strong enough to handle them. I had convinced myself that I could ignore them and keep going, that nothing truly terrible would happen. But something had happened. I could feel it in the air. The forest was changing. A chill ran down my spine as I reached out to touch the board. The red ink that marked the rules had started to fade, as if the forest was slowly erasing them, like it was trying to rewrite its own story. The moment my fingers brushed against the wood, a sharp pain shot through my hand, blinding, raw, as if the forest itself had pricked my skin with thorns. I pulled back instinctively, but something strange happened. The world around me seemed to tilt, the trees swaying slightly, as if they were alive, breathing. The ground beneath my feet shuddered. The whispers, soft at first, grew louder, swirling around me. Words I couldn't quite understand. But one thing was clear, they were coming from the trees. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned, looking for the nearest exit, but the forest seemed to stretch on forever. The path that had brought me here no longer existed. It was like the forest had swallowed it whole. You can't leave. The voice was unmistakable. It was Romerio. His voice was calm, even soothing, as though he were speaking to a child who had done something wrong. But there was an edge to it, a hardness that sent a cold shiver through me. I spun around, eyes wide, and there he was. Romerio stood just beyond the edge of the clearing, his silhouette barely visible in the shadows of the trees. He was watching me, his eyes glinting in the dim light, as if he knew something I didn't, as if he'd been waiting for me to break the final rule. "You should have followed the rules, Taylor," he said, his voice low and steady. "But now, it's too late. You've crossed the line." His words hung in the air, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The reality of it hit me all at once. The rules weren't just warnings. They were boundaries, gates that kept something inside the forest at bay. And now that I'd broken them, that thing was awake. It was watching. "What is it?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What's out there?" Romerio didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, moving closer to me, his eyes never leaving mine. The air between us seemed to grow colder, heavier. The forest itself was alive, its branches creaking and groaning, almost as if it were trying to communicate. "You don't need to know," Romerio replied finally, his tone softer now, almost pitying. "You'll never leave. Not unless you replace me." My breath hitched. What do you mean? He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the smile of someone who had accepted their fate, who had long ago surrendered to whatever dark force lay hidden in the woods. You see, Taylor, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, the forest needs someone to protect it, someone who can keep it balanced. And now, you're the new caretaker. My stomach dropped. I had no words. My mind screamed that it couldn't be true, that it was all just some terrible dream. But the forest had changed. It wasn't just a place. It was something else, something ancient, something alive. And I had become a part of it. Romeo stepped closer, almost too close, and I could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on me. You'll understand soon enough. The rules, they're not just words, Taylor. They're the key to the balance. Without them, everything falls apart. The forest consumes everything. Everything it touches. I took a step back, but Romeo didn't move. No, I said, my voice trembling. I won't stay here. I won't. I'll leave. He shook his head slowly, almost regretfully. You can't. You've broken the final rule. And now you belong to it. You belong to the forest. A sudden noise, a cracking of branches, cut through the tension. My heart leaped in my chest as something moved in the shadows behind him. Something huge. Something unnatural. Romeo glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. His smile faded, and for the first time, there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. It's too late, he whispered. I turned and ran, but it was no use. The forest closed in around me, the trees twisting and shifting like they were alive, and the whispers grew louder, louder, until they were all I could hear. And then I understood. The forest was alive, and I was already a part of it. The fire crackled in front of me, its orange glow casting long shadows over the damp ground. My fingers ached as I gripped the damp wood of the old chair I found near the fire pit. The night air was colder than I'd expected, the chill creeping up through the soles of my boots and sinking into my bones. A thick mist had settled around the edges of the clearing, moving in slow, heavy waves like something alive. I had no idea what time it was. The forest played tricks on time, made it bend and fold in on itself. How long had I been here? Hours? Days? It felt like I'd been lost in this place forever. Romerio's words echoed in my head. The forest remembers. You can't escape it, Taylor. I tried to leave, try to break the cycle, but it wouldn't let me. The rules, the voices, the endless shadows, they were all part of it now. I could feel the weight of it pressing in around me, thick like smoke in the air. Every time I tried to make a run for it, the forest pulled me back, twisted the path, forced me to follow the rules I had once ignored. But tonight I was done. The fire crackled louder, its orange fingers reaching toward the sky, and I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just sit here and let the forest take me like it had taken so many others. The rules, the rituals, Romerio's twisted devotion to whatever ancient force lived in the trees, it all needed to end. Tonight, I had to break the cycle. But how? I glanced at the charred remains of the signpost. The list of rules had been burned away, the edges of the wood curling and blackening. But I could still hear the voice of those rules in my head, as if the trees themselves were whispering them. Leave a gift. Do not whistle. Never answer the voices. I clenched my jaw and reached into my bag, pulling out the only thing I had left, my camera. The one thing that had always helped me make sense of the world, even when everything felt out of control. It felt absurd, holding it in my hands now, like I could somehow capture the truth of this place through a lens. It was all I had. Romeo had warned me about the final rule: never destroy the rules. If you break it, the forest will take its price. But what was the price? What could be worse than the madness I'd already seen? The forest had already claimed so much from me. My peace, my sanity, my sense of time. It had taken everything and twisted it into something unrecognizable. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep hiding. I stared into the fire, the heat on my face almost unbearable. There was no turning back now. With shaking hands, I set the camera on the ground in front of me, the lens pointed at the fire. It wasn't just about the rules anymore. It was about choice, about taking back control, even if it meant facing the darkness head-on. I threw another log onto the fire, the crackling would breaking the silence of the forest. And then I stood up, facing the clearing. I could feel Romario's presence, even though he wasn't here. The trees seemed to hum, their branches swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. The air was thick with something older than the earth itself, something ancient and terrible. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The decision felt final, like a door closing behind me with no way back. I started to chant, low and steady at first. The words didn't make sense, but I didn't need them to. The forest was listening, I knew that much. As I spoke louder, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves around me. The ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble, and I felt the air grow heavier with each word. My chest tightened. Something was happening, something I couldn't stop. The trees began to shift, like they were moving closer, circling me. The fire flickered, casting dark shadows on the edge of the clearing. And then, just as I felt the last word leave my lips, a sound pierced the night. It was Romario's voice, but it wasn't the calm, collected tone I'd heard earlier. This time, it was strained, almost desperate. "You shouldn't have done this," he whispered, his voice coming from all directions at once. "The forest will take its price, Taylor. You can't outrun it." I spun around, searching the trees, but there was nothing there. Just the oppressive darkness, the looming figures of the trees, and the weight of the air pressing in on me. I felt something move behind me, a shadow darker than the night itself, and a cold hand gripped my arm. My body tensed, my mind racing. I didn't have time to think, didn't have time to scream. The forest was claiming its price. But I had made my choice. I wrenched myself free and stumbled backward, falling to the ground beside the fire. The shadows around me grew thicker, wrapping around me like a blanket. I could feel them pulling at me, dragging me down into the earth. My breath came in ragged gasps. The forest's grip tightened, and I realized this was it. I couldn't escape. The forest would have me now. I closed my eyes, hearing the whispers of the lost ones, feeling the weight of their eyes on me, the weight of the forest closing in. And then, just as the darkness took me, I heard a voice, my own. It was a whisper in the wind, faint and broken, but unmistakable. "The forest remembers." It was the last thing I heard before the world went black. I never thought I'd be here again, standing at the edge of whispering pines. The forest is silent, like it always is, as if it's holding its breath. The fog rolls in slowly, but it's thicker today, as if it's waiting for something, or someone. I'm not sure how much time has passed since I left. Days, weeks, it feels longer, or maybe it feels shorter. Either way, the outside world is distant now, as though it never really mattered. The memory of what happened here, of everything that twisted and broke inside me, is already starting to fade like a dream you can't quite remember. But it hasn't faded from the forest. No, the forest remembers. I can feel it. Its cold grip tightening around my chest as I stand at the entrance to the old campground. Everything looks the same, just as I left it. The lanterns on the trail glow faintly, like ghosts whispering in the dark. The wooden sign, "Whispering Pines," still hangs above the dirt road, aged and cracked but untouched by time. The rules are still here. I can see them even before I step closer. The board, red ink still smudged in places, the words as sharp as knives. 13 rules, etched in a language I thought I would forget. But I haven't forgotten them. I can still remember the terror, the way the woods seemed to move on their own, the voices in the dark. But what's strangest of all is the feeling of being watched. I can't shake it. I look around, but there's no one. No Romario. No signs of anyone. Not even a footprint in the dirt. Just silence. And the trees. The damn trees. They stand so still, but they feel like they're alive, like they've been waiting for me. I stand there for a moment, caught in the thick fog, the air heavy in my lungs. The chill creeps into my bones, and I shiver despite myself. The sound of footsteps behind me makes me turn. But when I look, there's no one there. I take a deep breath and force my legs to move. I step closer to the fire pit, the place where it all started. The rules, the gift, all of it. I never should have ignored them. That's the one thing I've learned. Some rules are meant to be followed. They weren't just warnings. They were laws. Laws of the land. Laws of something older than any of us. I walk past the fire pit, my feet crunching the dry leaves beneath me. I don't want to be here, but I have to be. I know that now. The sound. a twig snapping behind me. I stop. I don't look back. There's nothing to look at anyway. The fog is thick, swallowing everything in its path. The trees seem to lean closer, like they're listening. I reach the board. The same 13 rules, the same red ink. But there's something new. A word, added at the very bottom. It's not in the same handwriting, but I can tell it's written in haste, urgent. Welcome. I stand there for a moment, the fog swirling around me, and something stirs in the pit of my stomach. I've seen that word before. I've heard it in the distance, whispering through the trees when I tried to escape. It's the same word that haunted my dreams, the same word that pulled me back here, whether I wanted it or not. I hear a noise again, and this time, I don't hesitate. I turn, and there he is, Romerio. His face is pale, almost ghostly, and he's standing at the edge of the path, as if he's been waiting for me. He smiles, but it's the kind of smile that doesn't reach his eyes. It's cold. Empty. You're back, he says quietly, his voice like the wind through the trees. I knew you would be. I don't say anything. I don't need to. There's nothing left to say. The rules are still here. The forest still waits. And now, there's someone new to carry on the legacy. I take a step back, but Romerio doesn't move. He just stands there, watching, waiting. The fog grows thicker. The trees lean closer. A figure steps from the shadows. Another camper, young, with a pack slung over their shoulder. They walk toward the board, eyes wide, scanning the rules as if they're just another mystery waiting to be solved. And as I watch them, I can't help but smile. It's strange, but I can't stop it. A chill runs down my spine, and for the first time, I feel something like peace settle over me. The forest has a way of getting what it wants. And now, it has a new soul to claim. The newcomer is just the beginning. The forest will take them, just like it took me. And when they disappear, someone else will come. It's a never-ending cycle. And now I am part of it. I turn away, heading toward the trees, as the newcomer steps closer to the board. I know what happens next. I've seen it before, and I'm not afraid anymore. Because I'm the forest now, and it is me.